Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perek Vav Mishnah Daled. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. The Mishnah discusses the time when a resident may abandon his rights, Me'matai Notnin Reshut, when may one abandon his rights in the courtyard, permitting the other residents to carry. Bet Shammai Amrim Mibod Yom. Bet Shammai say he must do so while it is still day on Friday before Shabbat begins. Once Shabbat begins, it is forbidden because it is a form of transaction, kinyan, and transactions are forbidden on Shabbat. And the Rav explains, according to Bet Shammai, abandonment is a transfer of rights from the one who did not join the Eruv to the other residents. Therefore, it is similar to a business transaction. Since business is prohibited on Shabbat, he must abandon his rights before Shabbat. But Bet Hillel say he may do so even after it gets dark and Shabbat has begun, because it is not a transaction. The Rav explains Bet Hillel maintain that abandonment is merely giving up rights. Since abandonment does not require transfer to the other residents, it is not similar to a business transaction and may be done even on Shabbat. Now, we learned in the previous Mishnah that when one abandons his rights to a courtyard, things may not be carried from his house to the courtyard for the rest of that Shabbat. The Mishnah now discusses what happens if he violates this restriction. Mishna Yomi. If a person abandoned his rights and afterwards carried out from his house to the courtyard, ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, whether he did so unintentionally, for example, he forgot that he was not supposed to carry out from his house to the courtyard, or whether he did so deliberately, hareze oser, he prohibits carrying for all the residents, because by carrying from his house to the courtyard, he has in effect reclaimed his rights. Now Rashi explains on page 69b in Masechet Eruvin, to abandon one's rights to the courtyard means to give up the right to carry between the house and the courtyard. A person who violates his commitment makes it clear that he is retracting his abandoning and reclaiming his rights. Now, although carrying unintentionally does not actually restore his rights, since he did not intend to reclaim them, the rabbi still prohibited the residents from carrying in this case, so that people would not be lenient in cases where he deliberately carried out to the courtyard. Div Rebbe Meir, these are the words of Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Yehuda Omer, but Rebbe Yehuda says, b'mezid oser. If he carried out to the courtyard deliberately, he prohibits the courtyard. Bishogeg eno oser. But if he carried out unintentionally, he does not prohibit it. And the commentaries explain Rebbe Yehuda is not concerned that this will lead to people being lenient even when he carries out deliberately. And the Tosfot Yom Tov adds that once the other residents of the court have taken out items from their houses to the courtyard based on the abandonment, they have acquired the abandoned rights, and the abandoner cannot reclaim his rights to prohibit carrying, as we learned in Mishnah 2. And the Rav does add, Ve'en halacha k'Rebbe Meir, the halacha does not follow Rebbe Meir, the halacha follows Rebbe Yehuda. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Daled. We begin now with Mishnah Hey. We know a shitufei mevot is made with food owned jointly by all the residents. The Mishnah now discusses this law. Baal habayit shutaf lishchenav. If a homeowner shared an alley with two neighbors and owned food together with them for business purposes, which the Rav explains they owned food together for reasons other than to create a shituf. Lazeh bayayin v'lazeh bayayin. The law is as follows. If he owned wine together with one of the neighbors and also owned other wine together with the other neighbor, which the commentators explain, each one owns wine jointly with him, but his two neighbors do not own any wine together, the Mishnah says, enam tzichim la'arev. And they poured all the wine into one container, they do not need to contribute other food to make an eruv shituf. Instead, they can use the wine they own together for the shituf. Now, the Mishnah teaches us 2 points, the Ran says. A, the wine can be used for the shituf even though the purpose of their joint ownership was for other reasons. And B, although none of the wine is owned by all three residents together, it still suffices for the shituf. The one who shares in both wines brings them all together into one shituf. Lazeh bayayin v'lazeh b'shem. And if, however, he owns wine together with one neighbor and oil together with the other, tzirichim la'arev. They must contribute other food to make an eruv shituf. They cannot use the wine and oil for the shituf, even if they pour them into one container, because wine and oil cannot mix together to form one liquid. And the Rashba explains, a shituf joins the residents together in ownership of one food. Since wine and oil cannot be combined to become one, they cannot be used together to form a shituf. Rabbi Shimon says, echad zeh ve'echad zeh enam tzrichim la'arev. In either case, they do not need to use other food to make an eruv. Even if you owned wine with one neighbor and oil with the other, the food can be used as a shituf, because according to Rabbi Shimon, when wine and oil are mixed, they are considered one liquid. This is how the Ritba explains it on page 71b in Masechet Eruvin, and the Rav does tell us, Ven halakha Rabbi Shimon, the halakha does not follow Rabbi Shimon. That is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.